Let's get more now on Labor's big win in the Victorian state election. Just how much was the federal government to blame for the defeat of the state's coalition? Darren Chester is the federal MP for Gippsland in Victoria's East. He's also the parliamentary secretary to the Defence Minister. He joins us from our Canberra studio. Darren Chester, good morning to you.
Good morning, Michael.
How much blame should the Abbott government take here?
Well, the thing with an event like this, with an election result like this, there's plenty of blame to go around for everyone. Everyone can share a little bit of this one. I've got no doubt that some of the issues associated with the tough decisions we had to make in the federal budget to try and get our nation back on track, to try and get the structural budget problems under order that was left to us by the Labor Party, that's had some impact on the result. But by and large, it was a Victorian election based on Victorian issues. The issues related to the TAFE funding, the failure to get an agreement with the ambulance union, the Jeff Shaw debacle, the amount of dysfunctionality that arose out of the parliament because of Jeff Shaw, that made it all very hard for Dennis Napthine, who I thought was running a very good government. It all made it very hard for him to get a clear message out. And I think it's primarily Victorian issues shaped the election, but there's no doubt that people have a view on whether the federal issues have an impact. I think it's small in comparison to the much more substantial Victorian issues.
Well, Senior Liberal MP Robert Clark certainly thinks so. He says the federal budget was a distraction, in his view, that made it hard for the state Liberals to get across their message.
Well, as I said, we can apportion blame as much as we like after the event, but I think for a lot of us, and I'm a Victorian and I'm a strong supporter of the National Party, obviously, rather than look north to try and find who to blame, we all need to look in the mirror a bit and say, well, we ran a pretty poor campaign. End of the day, the Labor Party ran a better campaign on the ground. There's plenty of evidence to support that. The Liberal and Nationals in coalition failed to get their message out. Now, rather than blame someone else, we all need to perhaps, pick our bundles up, get on with our job. We're in opposition now, and we need to make sure that this is a one-term Andrews government before it does too much damage to the great state of Victoria.
It was a particularly bad result, I think you'd have to agree, Darren Chester, for your party, the National Party. A 32% swing in the previously fairly safe National Party seat of Shepparton. What went wrung there?
Yeah, there's no sugarcoating a result like that one, Michael. And we've seen some of those swings in Victoria in recent times. The Nationals were the beneficiaries of a 25% swing in Mildura only a few years ago, a 25% swing in Gippsland East. So we've been the beneficiaries a couple of times, and this time we copped a hiding in Shepparton. That happens. I think the electorate is quite volatile at the moment in many regional areas. They're prepared to swing quite widely. One of the danger times for the National Party in any election cycle is when we're trying to transition a long-serving member to a new candidate. And what we find happens in the Nationals in particular is the long-serving former member is the identity of the brand in that particular electorate. And when we put a new person in, it's sometimes difficult for us to attract the same vote. And that's what I think has happened in Shepparton. But all credit to the candidate who's got ahead of us on this occasion. We'll be back in there fighting, trying to win that seat back in the future. And
that candidate is Susanna Sheed, who's poised to become an independent MP for Shepparton. How unhelpful was your colleague Barnaby Joyce's comments that the National Party didn't feel the National Party was obligated to help fight for the salvation of that SPC fruit processing plant because federally the National Party did not represent that area of Shepparton?
It's an interesting question. We can debate this one for a long time, but I think it's probably quite a minor issue in the scheme of things. We need to remember that the Victorian Nationals under Peter Ryan and assisted by Dennis Napthine actually came to the rescue of SPC and provided $20 million, or more than $20 million, to save the company. So while Barnaby's comments perhaps weren't helpful to our candidate on the ground, we had a better message to sell in that the Victorian Nationals, the Victorian Liberal Party worked together to save the company. So I don't think it was a big issue. I understand that on the ground the independent campaigned very well. And again, if you're out campaigned, you've got to learn from your mistakes. You just got to suck it up and accept that we were beaten by a better campaign on the day and perhaps leading up to it, and learn your lessons.
OK, we're heading to this critical week of federal parliament now. The former Victorian Premier Jeff Kennett says the Abbott government is a shambles. His word. What is the government going to do to try to correct its path?
Well, first of all, I take exception to Jeffrey's description, but Jeff Kennett is never known to be a shy or retiring type, and he's pretty forthright in his opinions. Jeff's no longer a member of Parliament in either Victoria or at the federal level, and so he's just a commentator on the outside, and that's fine for Jeff to have his assessments. He is missing the very big point that over the past 12 months, this government, the federal coalition government, has delivered in spades. It's delivered the 3 free trade agreements which the Labor Party said was impossible. It's managed to repeal the carbon tax and provided household relief for people right across Australia in the order of $550 per household. We've got on with the job of building the $50 billion infrastructure program we promised, and that's happening right now around Australia, creating jobs every day. So I simply don't accept the description provided by Jeff Kennett. I'm not saying we've got it all perfect. We're working very hard with the crossbenchers to try and get our agenda through the federal Senate. But at the end of the day, and you've just heard on the latest Elite report, we have some structural budget problems we're trying to deal with. These are legacy issues the Labor Party handed to the coalition, and unfortunately there's some tough decisions we've had to make, and we're working very hard to try and address them. We're trying to get the budget back into a sustainable position so that we don't have to inflict additional pain on Australian people into the future.
And finally, you are the Parliamentary Secretary for Defence, Darren Chester. Why don't Defence Force personnel deserve a pay rise?
Well, it's a very subjective way of putting the question, with all due respect. The Australian Defence Force personnel do deserve a pay rise, and we've negotiated in a way to get 4.5% over 3 years. Would I like to pay them more? I'd love to. But we just finished talking about the fact that we've inherited a budget under enormous pressure. If we don't get spending under control, the problems we're going to face into the future in terms of the structural budget problems are going to be enormous. Now, I don't like the fact that we have to say to our Defence Force personnel, we can't pay you as much as we'd like to, but the Labor Party really is being quite duplicitous in this debate. The Labor, the Labor Party left us with a mess to clean up, and for them now to get in the road of the clean-up team, I think is very disappointing. It's disingenuous, and it's quite hypocritical for Labor members to talk about our support for defence when the Labor Party cut $16 billion out of defence over a 4-year period. Now, the Labor Party has more questions to answer on this issue as well.
And just speaking of the budget, so you say your hands are tied because of the financial circumstances facing the government. Chris Richardson from Deloitte Access Economics, that report you mentioned earlier, as well as talking about $35 billion extra deficits over the next 4 years, says in his view, any hope of the Abbott government balancing the books within 4 years is well and truly toast. What do you say to that?
Well, it will be toast if we don't get the Senate and the Labor Party to work with us on some of the savings measures which are in the Senate now, some of them which were Labor Party saving Labor Party saving proposals in the first place. If they get out of the way and let us actually get on with the job of fixing the budget, we might have more chance of doing the job the Australian people elected us to do.
OK, Darren Chester in Canberra, thank you very much for your time this morning.
All the best.